Kia ora, beer fans, and welcome to the Third Pint Theory. You're with myself, Michael
Hello.
Donaldson. Hello, Martin. You're with myself, Michael Donaldson, and on the other side of the window, the beer bigwig himself, Martin Bridges. G'day, Martin.
G'day, Michael. How you going?
I'm doing well, thanks. We're sitting here on a Monday afternoon, uh, and we've got a little bit of something different, Martin. I suppose you'd
Hmm.
say. We're not talking to a brewer as such, or
And we're
anyone
not
even.
talking to a publican.
No,
We're talking to somebody a bit further back in the food chain, I
yeah,
guess.
that's right. Yeah,
Doug Michael from Gladfield Malt.
yeah. And this was I mean, if you listen to it, you cannot not enjoy listening to Doug because he's just so enthusiastic and passionate, and it's almost like he doesn't have too many filters, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
he certainly doesn't.
And that's not saying
It
that you're
was
going to
this
get.
was one of those great interviews, and I love about the I've mentioned this in the past that the best podcast interviews, to my mind, are where we as the presenters say very little,
Yeah,
which is kind of uh, point set Doug off, and away he goes, and gives us a whole heap of um, really great insight, but also, as you say, that passion and dedication to making a great product, which has really, as we've said before, has kind of pushed the New Zealand craft beer industry to new heights, having that quality malt available locally.
yeah. I think one day I was talking to Pete Gillespie about Gladfield Malt, so Pete from Garage Project, and they had become a recent convert. And Pete had this. He was really kind of almost fixated on English style malts for a lot of their beers because he had a history with them and he understood them. And he's just said an interesting thing to me, which was like when he was first introduced to Gladfield, he was like, "Isn't this just a farmer from South Canterbury who's decided to try and malt his own grain?" Kind of, that little bit like, what's going on here? And he said that it didn't take a while for him to be convinced, but he had to get his head around the fact that in some ways, what Gladfield have done for malting is what a lot of home brewers have done for craft beer. That's I'm stretching the analogy, but it's like it's very much a DIY kind of
Yeah,
setup. It's like I have the grain, I grow it, I'm gonna learn to malt it, and
yeah.
yeah,
And then I'm making base malt. I'm going to learn how to roast it and make specialty malt.
yeah, yeah. And these are not
Spoiler
easy
alert.
things to do. Like,
No, no, like the English maltings that Pete was talking about. I've been doing this for hundreds of years, like
yeah,
literally hundreds of years.
yeah,
Um, uh, and uh, and Doug's kind of got going in the last couple of decades,
yeah,
and has figured it out for himself. A bit of YouTube and a bit of good old Kiwi number 8 wire mentality, and he's producing an outstanding product.
yeah. And the one thing that I've come to understand a bit more recently, even though I've been nearly 2 decades in this craft beer business, in terms of as a voyeur from the outside, as a journalist, not in it. But I sort of had this idea in my head that grain was like, say, rice. You could buy it and sit it in a container in your cupboard for months. And when you come to use it, it'll just be the same as it always was. That it was a reliable kind of static product. But what I've come to understand is that there is a quite a big difference between fresh malted barley or fresh malted grains and some that have been traveling around the world to get here. And lots of people tell me they love what they love about Gladfield is that it's got that freshness,
Mm,
and I, you just can't underestimate that, in terms of, it wasn't something we really were that familiar with in New Zealand for a long time. So, you
no,
know,
because it wasn't an option.
yeah,
I wasn't. And the ability to compare like a locally grown, locally malted malt with a UK or a US or a German
yeah,
or whatever. And those have some. I love Gladfield malts, but I like a floor malted Maris Otter from the UK has a special character. I just think having those options
mm,
is just such a benefit to the local beer industry.
yeah,
And I think Doug just waxes lyrical about what that brings
mm,
to the beers. I thought it was really interesting as well, kind of how he said how tastes have changed in terms of styles,
mm,
and how when he got started, it was like everybody wants clear beer. We've got to keep those proteins down. We want a nice clear beer, and now everybody wants hazies.
yeah, yeah, and that goes back to the ingredients of what create those beers. It's not like you can take what you normally have and magic up that look. You
Yeah.
need special ingredients. Um, yeah, uh, I did think that one of the more interesting things that Doug talked about was just the whole, I don't know, the economics of agriculture in New Zealand as well. So we sort of veer away from beer in places, which is interesting in itself. And there was lots of good information in there, I think, about, I guess, people, it's food security we talk about, because, growing grains is not just about beer.
No.
It's bread and cereal and cattle feed and all sorts of things, that are really important to the New Zealand economy.
Yeah.
So,
And I think the stat that you mentioned again, spoiler alert, is
yeah,
that New Zealand only grows 40% of the grain that it consumes,
yeah,
which, given how massive agriculture is as part of our economy, is
mm,
mind-boggling.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm sure there was a time when it was 100% back, probably before you and I were born. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know for sure. But I think this is the global economy, isn't it? That we're in. Um, I will mention that I think there's only one glitch in it. We lost Doug briefly in the conversation. He disappeared and then came back, and my technical editing skills being what they are, I think I've put a little band-aid over it. Yeah, so I
Yeah,
really
the
apologise for that. But
rural internet doesn't
yeah,
always hold up all that strong. He
that's
did
right.
pretty well, but yeah, we did have a couple of little dropouts to try and fix, and I
Yeah,
think there's probably only one that's really noticeable.
yeah. Um, so before we cross over to that, what else is news, Martin? What you had a good.
Um, I think what I'm very much enjoying dark beer season.
Mm,
The darker beers are popping out. There's quite a few of those around, but we are kind of steaming full tilt into competition and awards season.
yes.
And as we sit here today, next weekend is one of the highlights of the year if you like New Zealand hops, and
Mm,
that's the Smiths New Zealand IPA Challenge in Queenstown. So I am very much looking forward to sampling some of the winners that come out of that. Unfortunately, my wallet and my liver are
yeah,
not up to the challenge of
yeah,
going to Queenstown for the Smiths New Zealand IPA Challenge, but I will be looking forward to trying some of the winners.
yeah. It is a great event. You and I have both been there before, and if you're in the area, so Queenstown Central, it's worth getting along. I think yeah, you'll never try all the beers. I don't think it's not feasible, but there are
No,
always
33,
yeah,
33 beers over the course of a weekend. I think you could,
yeah,
as long as you were just taking little sips.
possibly, yeah. Um, but yeah, so that it is a really good celebration of New Zealand hops, and um, I think there's been some really good beers come out of that, and they're brewed as one-offs, but they kind of hang around. And the one that I always think of is the Good George Haze of Glory, which
Yeah.
debuted in that competition and is now kind of part of their core range. And what was it? Duncan's won it one year unexpectedly with.
Yeah,
That was
and
one
then
of the
had to go out and brew some more because they'd not made a huge amount.
yeah, yeah. But Parrot Dog always do well. They're always among the contenders. So yeah, looking forward to that. As we sit here and speak, the Three Sisters times Sunshine crowdfunding campaign is coming to a close. They're a few thousand shy of their target, but we both think they're going to get there. By the time you listen to this, you'll know one way or the other. But you're kind of surprised that there's still an appetite for people to part with money to give to breweries.
Yeah, I think so. We're in a tough economy.
Mm.
I don't think there's anybody. Well, there's not very many people out there who are kind of comfortable in
Yeah,
any sense, and so therefore, having a bit of disposable income to put into a brewery with, and I think we all understand that some of these crowdfunding, well, all of these crowdfunding things probably have a higher degree of risk than many other investments.
yeah,
So it's I am surprised
yeah,
that they're doing so well with it.
yeah,
I'm very happy that they are. I'm very happy that it's funding and the expansion of Three Sisters.
yeah,
And they make some really good beer. Joe's a really lovely fella, and
yeah.
I'd love to see more of their beers around the country. I don't think they're going to get to the stretch target which would have seen them opening an Auckland venue.
No.
Sadly, but
Yeah.
I'm reasonably confident that they will at least get over their minimum.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, I was just reading some of the Q&As on the platform, and one of the discussions was about a lot of the money that they will raise will go to an upgrade to the Sunshine, existing Sunshine tap room in Gisborne. And one of the things they need is like a deep fat fryer to do fries, because one of the promises of the pledge is unlimited fries. And so, it is quite humorous.
You can't cook them.
We need this money in order to make the thing that we promised you we were going to give you. But I do, they'll use the money to upgrade that tap room. That'll be really good, and to also just realign the assets across the country. But I have had some Three Sisters beers brewed out of Gisborne, so some of their core range beers have landed. Fuzzy Panda Hazy IPA, Rain in the Face APA, Owakura Blonde. These are they've always been good beers, but they are tasting really good. Like, I think,
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that they seem cleaner and fresher than the ones I remember. Fuzzy Panda's a previous award winner, so it's a good beer, but definitely they were really nice drops that came to me via the Gisborne production. So yeah, it's a good move for them, I think. Really good.
So, it's good to hear, because it is it's always a bit of a challenge brewing existing recipes that have been designed around an existing kit, brewing them on on a new one, you could always expect a little bit of an uncertain period at the start. But if they're nailing it straight out the gate, then that's a good sign.
Yeah, well, because I think it's now from 600 litre brew kettle to 2,500 litre kind of thing. It's it is a big scale. So, well, I think without further ado, because we have got it was quite a long interview with Doug, we should cross over to that, and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome, Doug Michael, to the Third Pint Theory podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Michael. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we've dragged you. Have we dragged you off the farm at all?
Oh, I'm always out on the farm as much as I can, and in the malt plant as well. It's my passion, really. I'm a bit of a homeboy, I suppose. So Gabi struggles to get me off the place sometimes.
Okay. I thought that's probably a good note to start because, I think a lot of our listeners will know what or who Gladfield Malt are. They would have seen your logo, seen the malt. Maybe they've brewed with it. Can you just tell us, your story, the farming background and how you made that decision to get into malting grain?
Well, it's a long story.
We've got a while.
Keep it brief, but I grew up on a farm in Canterbury. It was a mixed cropping farm, so we were farming sheep. We were lambing down around about 1,500 mixed age ewes, and we were cropping. Predominantly, we were growing malting barley for the malting company, which was in Heathcote at the time, just down by the Port Hills there in Christchurch, and we were growing other small seed crops, clover and grass seed and peas and wheat. So that was how I grew up. I was just always hugely passionate. I was always out the door before Dad, and it's not that Dad was slow, it's just that I was just so super keen, and I just always wanted to be fully involved. I was an outdoors kid, and I probably struggled a bit with reading and writing. Back then we called it stupid. Nowadays we probably call it dyslexia or something like that. I don't know, but so that was my place. That was my happy place, and I just grew up. It was the 80s, so things were pretty, as you know, it was a fair bit of turmoil back in the day. There was the Rogernomics, and I know that it was pretty tough going for Mum and Dad. I think they went from about 4 or 5% interest to 28% interest overnight there when they changed things around and opened things up. And whether it was for at the time, it was a big shock to the agricultural economy in New Zealand. But Mum and Dad took it in their stride. They are very positive people. They had a lot of energy, and we came through the 80s reasonably well. They were very thrifty, Mum and Dad, and we learnt to cope on our own and do everything ourselves, and we worked really hard as a family, and we never really thought of it as work though. It was just a lifestyle. For me it was just a challenge. I just loved getting out there and getting involved, and it was a wee bit like playing a game of rugby. You just got stuck in, and you always wanted to be the first one to make the tackle, and you always wanted to be on the bottom of the ruck, and the same thing was when we're on the farm, and so we came up with the it was work hard, play hard, and party hard. It was really the mantra back in the day. So it wasn't very long before I got to the stage where I was able to start farming on my own. Started farming at the age of 20, and that was when things just started to slowly turn around. I bought my own property, and my parents helped me into that. They were very, very supportive of me, but I quickly realised when I was farming that the returns and the cost of land and everything else, it was a real challenge to get ahead. I had these lofty ambitions when I was young, but when push came to shove and I got took on the debt and everything else, I realised that I could barely cover the cost of the gates on the farm, let alone the fences and everything else. And so I had to start thinking laterally and thinking about, well, long term, how are we going to make this work? And one of the things when you look back, so we've been growing malting barley in Canterbury for 5 generations, and when I look back, I could see that each generation, worked really, really hard to try and, help the next generation out, but we weren't really getting too far because the value of land and the cost of everything and the return wasn't really quite stacking up. So I looked at my options and I looked at what we were really good at on our farm, and the thing that we were really good at was growing malting barley. It's a great area. We've got the right soil types, good arable soils. We've got irrigation. The climate, everything was perfect for it. And so it just happened by chance that I was on a young farmer's trip, and we went into Christchurch to the Loaded Hog Brewery. I don't know if people remember that back in the day.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so anyhow, we were at the brewery, out the back of the brewery, and the brewer, I seen all this Aussie malt stacked up in the corner. And me being a farmer and growing malting barley for the malting company back at the time, which was owned by the 2 big breweries, which was owned by DB and Lion at the time. And I said, well, why the hell have you got bloody Aussie malt here? You should be supporting the local. And he said, well, we can't get the local malt because obviously we're a craft brewery, we're in competition, and the malting company's owned by Lion and DB, and obviously they thought, well, we want to keep this to ourselves. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity. And so I went home and did a whole lot of homework and studied things up, and I thought, I'm going to give this a crack. Long story short, if I'd known how hard and difficult and everything it was, I probably wouldn't have gone down that track, because it's been a real journey. But it has been a really enjoyable one, and it's certainly opened a lot of doors for Gabi and myself and my family, and we've really enjoyed it. Yes, there's been a lot of setbacks along the way. It hasn't been plain sailing. We've had to start from nothing, and of course we were competing against the big multinationals, and the last thing that they wanted was something like us coming along and sort of getting a foothold. So I always remember one of the early memories of when I first started out in the maltings. I'd sort of, we didn't have a lot of capital, so we were basically like magpies picking up all the scrap metal we possibly can to try and piece together some sort of equipment to start making malt. And very similar to the way the craft brewers sort of worked back in the day as well.
Yeah.
And anyhow, so we'd sort of started out, and I remember all of a sudden this Mercedes pulled into the driveway, and it had the dark windows, and then all of a sudden these 2 henchmen got out of this Mercedes with their grey coats on, and I thought, gosh, this is the mafia. And I didn't realise at the time, but and of course I was just in my torn old overalls, and there was, everything looked probably a bit rough and what have you, and these guys got out of the car, sort of had a look around, and then they sort of really got back in the car and turned around and went away. And I found out later on that they were the guys from Malt Europe at the time who were probably just checking me out. And luck have it, they probably thought, oh, this guy's going nowhere. So they just turned around and left. But anyhow, that was certainly good motivation at the time.
So what era was this, Doug? When did you start?
So that's 22. That's 22 years ago. So about 2004, and I just met Gabi. So she'd just come over from Brazil. And really, that was the secret to our success, because, I had the vision, and from a practical point of view and a logistics point of view, it's my bread and butter. So, putting the business together was the easy part for me. But where I really struggled was with the areas that Gabi brought to the business. So she's an amazing person, and the fact that she's got almost a photographic memory, and she's very good on the administration and the written side of it. So, we worked really, really well together, and then of course she got involved with the marketing. But we didn't really do any marketing probably for the first 5 or 6 years, and that was obviously with the kids young. Gabi was, busy getting them up to school age. And we didn't really need to do a lot of marketing because it was word of mouth. We were producing a product that was just so much better than what was available, and we were able to concentrate on three basic things, and which right from the very beginning I said to Gabi, look, there's three things that we need to concentrate on. It was quality, consistency, and service, which are the three things that that our big multinational competitors can't really work on. But they work on, on low margins and huge turnover, so we can't compete on that. So that's what we worked on, and so in the early days it was word of mouth, and the craft brewers, they talk, and it's a very social industry, so it wasn't very long before, everybody sort of knew about us. And so that was quite a, the things grew a lot faster and quicker than what we expected, and of course also the timing was perfect too, with the craft beer industry growing and more breweries starting up. You can imagine in the early days, I remember the very first malt that we made, I had a 1 ton pallet on the back of the old man's ute, and we took it over to Miner's Brewery over on the west coast, because I remember ringing Alan up over there, and I said to him, Alan, look, I've got some malt here, you interested in trying it? I'm just starting up. And he says, yeah, I'll give it a whiz. So that was great. I got on the back of the old man's ute, and I drove all the way over there to Westport. Got up early, got over there, and we unloaded it. And I remember driving all the way back, and of course I was probably being a bit tight, but we got to Arthur's Pass, and I'm thinking, I'm running a bit low on fuel here, but I reckon it'll be a lot cheaper if I get to Sheffield. And taking me days, and as I was going through Arthur's Pass, I picked up this poor hitchhiker who looked like he'd been walking for about a couple of hours, and he was drenched. And anyhow, I was giving him a ride, and we were coming over Porter's Pass, and I ran out of fuel. So we coasted it, and I said, and this hitchhiker said to me, we're going to be buggered. He said, we'll be at least 2 or 3 hours before anyone picks us up. I said, no, mate, we'll be right. So I put my thumb out. Sure enough, I picked up a ride straight away, and we got a ride to the Springfield garage there, and managed to get some fuel. But you know what? I was trying to hitchhike back to the ute. It was at the bottom of Porter's Pass there, and I was there for 2.5, 3 hours. I got a ride back. I should have walked. But anyhow, that was just a story, typical of the things that happened in the early days when we first started out. And anyhow, Alan rang me up a couple of weeks later, and he said, this malt, he said, it's fantastic. I've never ever come across anything like it. And of course, that was really where it started. And of course, we just went from strength to strength. Obviously, we were supplying into Harrington's. They were, real champions for Gladfield in the early days. And you've got to remember too, back in the day, Christchurch was really leading the way with craft brewery. You had likes Dick Fife there, and that, and a few others, but of course then the earthquake really put us back a bit, and now things are really starting to change again now, of course, in Christchurch. Yeah. But it was good for us. So, and it wasn't very long before we started getting into some of the other breweries around, and it just took off.
Yeah, I think it's a good point actually, because I was talking the other week, we had on the podcast Greg McGill from Brewocracy up in Hamilton, and we were talking about New Zealand beers compared to the rest of the world and whatever, and he was saying that he thought access to your malt and having New Zealand grown malt was a real differentiator for New Zealand breweries. Do you think that that's the case, that's really helped the growth of the industry here?
Well, I think so, and it goes back to those three things I talked about, was quality, consistency and service. Now, one of the things that I identified early on in the business was that, the average craft brewer, he was like a one-armed paper hanger with crabs. He was trying to do everything. He was trying to, make his beer, he was trying to sell it, he was in charge of HR, he was in charge of doing his excise and all the other things and building the brewery in between. So the one thing, and of course he didn't have acres and acres of bright tanks that he could blend beer away. He didn't have an army of foot soldiers on the ground that could be testing the beer every step of the way. So he needed a malt that was absolutely consistent every week. And he needed to make sure he had the service to back it up, because if he forgot to order or something like that, it needed to be in his brewery. So that
I've heard the expression maritime barley, and is that a thing, and does that include Canterbury? And what does it mean for the barley, like in terms of the growing conditions?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you wouldn't probably get a better area in the world geographically and climate and soil than the Canterbury Plains for growing malting barley. And it's very simple, really. Barley, especially malting barley, likes to have a cool climate. Okay, and when they talk about maritime, what we're talking about is that we've got the sea all around us, and as a result of that, it keeps the climate very temperate. So we don't get too many extremes. So we don't get really, really hot summers or really cold winters. So we keep a very consistent climate. And so barley really likes to be around that 15, 16, 17 degrees, which is perfect in Canterbury. As you know, if you come to Canterbury, during our growing season, we get that on the breeze coming from the northeast coming offshore, and it's quite a cool sort of a breeze. But then as we get into the summertime, we get the fawn effect of the northwest winds coming over the southern Alps, which is dry, high sunshine hours. It's absolutely perfect. And then on top of that, of course, here in Canterbury, all our growers are all under irrigation. And so we have a very safe area for growing malting barley, and it also means the consistency of that grain from year to year is always secure for us as maltsters. So that's a great thing for our business. Whereas when you start to look at some of these areas like Australia, now as a classic example here, I mean, they're talking about a super El Nino event. Okay, now we haven't had one of those for quite a while, and whether it eventuates, who knows? But I mean, the law of averages would suggest that we're well overdue for it. Now, when you think about Australia, it's a broad acre farming area, so a totally different type of farming system. They have lower inputs, it's broad acre, but they have obviously lower yields. And how it operates over there is that, they'll probably have one or two really good years, and then they might have 3 or 4 bad years, and then they might have a couple of years where they just don't get anything. So it's very up and down, whereas here in Canterbury, we can guarantee we're always going to get something, and we can guarantee that quality. In a classic, you talk about what's happening in the Middle East and some of these other areas and how it affects the grain industry. Yeah, it is very important because, all of a sudden it's all about the margins, what it's going to cost to grow those crops, what's the return going to be, and as a result you get a lot of fluctuation in the markets, and that dictates what farmers are going to do. So here's a classic example. I've got 2 nephews that go over to Australia each year about this time of year to do the planting. This year they were rung up by the managers on some of these big farms over there and said, look, don't bother coming over. They said, look, we've had a couple of really good years in Australia and we're expecting a drought. The price of fertilisers is almost doubled and the cost of fuel, so we've decided that we're not going to be planting this year. And that's how Australia sort of works, because like I say, it's boom or bust over there, broad acre farming, and it all comes down to the return. But then of course what that creates supply and demand. So I'd imagine what will happen is that the price of grain will start to go up. They'll cover off some of their costs until next year they'll go, right, let's go in and we'll plant a lot more. But then of course the question is, do they get the rainfall to strike the seed and to finish those crops out? And that's the $1 million question. And this is where now with climate change starting to affect, we're getting a lot more extremes, and also, just when these events happen, it's a bit harder for people to really understand when they're going to, as a farmer, to make these calls. So, is that something that we need to be aware of here in New Zealand as a consumer? And so I guess that's one of the things that Gladfield's trying to champion at the moment is the New Zealand grown grains trademark. Now, this is a cool initiative that's been introduced by FAR, which is the Foundation for Arable Research in New Zealand. And what we're trying to do is give the consumer the ability to make informed choices. So at the end of the day, by having this trademark, people can see, is this product actually, using New Zealand ingredients? Now, the reality is, New Zealand, we use around about 3.5 million tonnes of grain in New Zealand, whether it be through bread or through malt or feed grains for pigs and chickens. So, but we only produce around about 40% of that. So and that's getting less and less every year, and there's a number of reasons why. First of all, there's other options available for the farmer. Obviously, dairying's a big thing in New Zealand, and of course that pays a lot more than what, for example, wheat does. And why is that? Because what happens overseas with some of these broadacre farming systems, they have surplus every now and then. And of course, the infrastructure that you need around New Zealand for us to get grain, say for example Canterbury, which is really the breadbasket of the grain growing area, up into the North Island, is too expensive, and we don't have those facilities anymore. So it's now cheaper to actually bring the grain across from the Tasman than what it is to get it across the Cook Strait. And that's one of the biggest issues we have. Now, it's hard to believe, back in 1880 we grew more wheat than what we do now. And that was when they did it all by hand.
Really?
It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
But
I think this. Yeah, that's. It almost seems ridiculous that you can't get stuff to the North Island cheaper than bringing it from Australia. But there should be a thing where, I don't know, as the world gets crazier, and there's a lot of talk about where we get our food from and the food safety in New Zealand. So, that whole thing about frozen vegetables that are done here, that we might not be able to have that because they are so cheap to get from overseas. But sooner or later, people have probably got to say, we've got to use what we've got here, right? It seems to make more sense. So, I think for a farmer.
The thing is that what we need to do is understand, okay, look, it all comes down to dollars and cents, and, what can the consumer afford? And the reality is that, we can't really afford to be buying 100% local because the cost is just so high. You've got to remember, we've got a lot of regulation and restrictions in New Zealand agriculture. We've got one of the highest levels of food safety, environmental safety in New Zealand, and it's not really a level playing field. So a lot of the stuff that's coming in, a lot of this food that's coming in, you can't compare it on the same level as what New Zealand's what we're having to do, what the hurdles that we're having to cross. We've just done a farm audit just recently on our farm. And it takes a full 12 hours, but there's probably about 3 to 4 weeks beforehand where we have to go through every little thing on our business. It's incredible the hoops that we have to jump through. All the stuff that we do, yet other businesses would hardly have any understanding of the level of food safety that we're at. And so when you compare that in the supermarket, it's not a level playing field, but at the same time, the local customers need to understand that if we don't support at least some of the product being from New Zealand, then we lose it altogether, and then that's when we really are at the mercy of the market. We still need to make sure that we can supply, at least half of what we consume here, because as we saw with COVID, as we saw with, this now with the Middle East crisis, is that, sometimes the infrastructure or getting things to New Zealand, it can get held up very easily and create a real panic in the market. And do we want that? No, we don't. And that's where the food security, argument comes into play. What level do we make sure that we continue to look after what we can produce here?
That's a good point.
Yeah, and one of the other things I wanted to talk about was kind of about, obviously when you started 20 odd years ago, you were probably just concentrating on base malt. But how has the kind of the portfolio developed over time, and how much has that been driven by kind of engagement with brewers?
Well, it's a good question, and I've got some good stories on that too. When we first started out, obviously we were just making pale malt, and in the initial stages we were very, very successful. Brewers are going, "Oh, this is great," and they were flocking to us, and then all of a sudden overnight, the sales just stopped. Okay, what's going on? And then we got a phone call from one of our customers, and they said, "Oh, look, Doug, I don't know whether you know this or not, but your competitor, he's an importer, and And he's telling us that if we don't buy the base malts off him, well, we're not going to get any of the specialty malts off him. And, okay, well, business is a business. And I thought, crikey. So I said to Gabi, there's only one thing we can do. We need to be able to do a full range, and we need to get our own roaster. So I went over to UK and Europe, and long story short, we purchased the roaster, we started it up, and before long we were churning out a full range of roasted malts. And then, of course, we filled everything else in, all the other sub-bases as well, and we were really determined to be able to do a full range. So that's really kind of what we discovered. If we didn't do that, we would have been going nowhere.
That's this is it's sort of how big breweries used to operate in the day, to an extent, the way, like DB and Lion kind of how they were with Max in some ways, and Max found it really hard to get what they wanted because the big supplier would say, you can't have this particular thing, and so they had to go offshore to get their bottles, for instance, But so you've had to go offshore to get the equipment you need to make the speciality stuff. But how did you learn to do that? Like, how do you teach yourself to malt these grains? Is it trial and error? Or are you on YouTube? What's the story?
Yeah, well, it's like anything. If you're really passionate about something, you will learn it. Okay, and I was super, super passionate, and I was super determined. We didn't have YouTube. We probably did back then. I didn't know how to work it. But I used to get on the phone. I remember, I was always an inquisitive when I was growing up and I'd always ask questions, trial and error. But it's amazing how, like I say, if you're really, really passionate about something, you'll learn it. And I would study in the books and everywhere. I'd read every single thing there was. But what we found, because when we first started the roasting side, and everyone said, oh, look, you've got to be walking around your Zimmer frame before you got the experience or know how to do roasted malts properly. And I'm going, oh, geez, there's not a lot of hope for us then, is there? And then, so we sort of started out. Obviously, I was over in the UK. I went and visited a few roasteries over there, and I gleaned a lot of information where I could. And then when we started the roasting, I realised that overseas, because roasting's been around such a long time, they used to use the roasters for getting rid of the lower quality barleys that weren't quite so good for malting. So in other words, high protein barley would go to the roaster. And I thought, well, look, we want to make a premium product here. Why aren't I sending my premium barley into the roaster? And of course, premium barley is generally low nitrogen. Well, that was a game changer. Straight away, we had a completely different product. It was just absolutely bursting with flavour. It was just bursting with everything. And that was really the secret how we really started to punch out above our weight. And, of course, generally low-protein barley is also fat. And, of course, we were getting these really plump crystal malts. It was just amazing. And the other thing, too, which we found early on, which was quite interesting, is that, some brewers would try the malts and they go, oh, this doesn't taste like the European stuff. And I used to say to them, well, it's because it's not oxidised. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, you know what it's like when you drink an oxidised beer. I said, it's the same thing, because the malts that you've been used to have been, they've been shipped across the equator and all around the world, and it's probably about 12 months old before you're using it, and it's oxidised. And that has a totally different flavour profile, which you've become accustomed to and think it's normal, but it's not normal. And then all of a sudden they started realising, and they were just astounded by the change in flavour it was having to their beer.
Interesting, yeah. I have sorry, Martin, did you?
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, because one of the things talking to brewers about Gladfield Malt is that they talk about the freshness. And I had never considered that as a thing. That you think it's been dried, kilned, that it's going to last, a certain length of time. But obviously that's not the case. And I just wonder how many maybe craft breweries you've won over on the basis that they understand the freshness aspect and they're opting for that as much as anything else, like the local product, the quality of the product, but the actual freshness being a factor?
Well, I think it's a combination of everything, really. It all comes together, and yes, that is one of the factors. I mean, it's just like your herbs and spices, isn't it? You know, if they're sitting in the back of your pantry for 3 or 4 years, and it's not going to give you the same punch that you're looking for. And it's the same with the specialty malts. And you know, like there's been a wee bit of a, I guess, around the world, people have been been turning off roasted products in their beers to a certain extent, and they talk about a lot of this, you know, oxidation and bits and pieces that the actual products cause to the beer, which is actually nonsense. Okay, so you know, the thing about these roasted products is that they're actually they're great for scavenging oxygen out of beer and what have you. So those sort of things aren't really true at all, but it's more a lot of the issues that have been happening over the years is the huge amounts of hops and dry hopping that's going into beer, and of course the roasted malts are getting taken all the bloody all the flack for it. In fact, we're actually the ones helping to solve the problems there. So that's always been quite a bit of an interesting one, and quite amusing to hear sometimes when I listen to some of the brewers. But you know, there's no doubt about it. You know, if you just stick with the quality, consistency, and service, it's so simple. You know, it's all I drum into my staff all day long. It's just 3 simple things that you need to worry about. You can have the best malt in the world, but if you don't get it in the brewery on time, it's no use to them. You know, and so that's the reality. We've just got to make sure we give them a value proposition every time they purchase Gladfield.
Yeah. It's a really good point that you were touching on there. I was interested in how kind of the changes in the craft beer market in terms of styles that are popular, things that people want to brew, how much you see that impacting in terms of what is popular in terms of your products.
Oh, that's great, and really, Gabi should be the one talking about that. She deals with the customers on a daily basis, and she gives me all the notes and tells me, right, you need to make this product. Well, when we first started out, hazy beers were a bad thing. Nobody wanted to have a hazy beer, and of course now everybody's after a hazy beer. So one of the things that we sort of changed to there was obviously the malted oats was a big thing, and that's a big seller for us now, for example. But you know, in the early days, if you'd asked me to make malted oats, I would have thought you were crazy. But you know, that's one of the areas, and this is another thing. Like when we first started out, and we were changing brewers over from using like a mainstream malt from a large malting company that was supplying malt into mainstream beer, you got to understand that malt is made differently. So it's a higher protein barley, and they were looking for a higher diastatic power. So it's got more enzyme activity, so they can convert a lot of the adjuncts that are going into the mainstream beers, or you know, obviously if they've got lots of sugar and that going into those things. So it's a totally different base malt specification. Whereas in the early days, our craft beer customers were all malt brewing. So they didn't want to have a high fan level in their malt, because all of a sudden that's going to give you problems with shelf life. It's going to give you that haze. So we were providing a malt that had a lower free amino nitrogen level, so that you weren't having this instability, and it was giving a lot better shelf life for their beers. So that was one area that we worked on. But of course now the craft brewers are adding more adjuncts in the form of mainly oats and flaked wheat and barley and things like that, because they're trying to create that haze. So that's where now we're actually looking, and we're about, this is the next new malt that we're looking to release just shortly actually, is a special diastatic malt that they can use in those brews to help with some of those high adjuncts for the hazy. So that's quite exciting. It's something we're quite excited about. To be fair, we haven't really released a lot of new malts in the last 3 or 4 years post-COVID. Of course, now a lot of our customers, especially in Australia, are going towards, you know, the more session style beers, lighter colours. So our lager light is a really, really popular malt now. Everyone's really looking for that really light coloured beer. But you know, like the main stars are still there. The Supernova was one that I brought out. I really liked. I thought it, you know, had a really a great place in New Zealand craft beer, because I would often go around and taste a lot of the IPAs. You know, the IPAs are the big craze in New Zealand, I always used to find them a wee bit cloey, just a wee bit too sort of a sweet to overdo the crystal malt. And I think, that comes back from their home brewing days. And I sort of felt, well, you're really probably overdoing the crystal malt. Yeah, it's great for my business, but it's not great for the industry. So I came up with a malt called Supernova, and it is so much drier, but it still gives you the same malty flavours and colour, and it just ferments out a wee bit more, and it just balances out a lot nicer with the hops. So that's a really big seller now. We sell a lot of that Supernova. Obviously the toffee malt was one of the early ones that we brought out, and I wanted to be able to create a malt that would give the beer a nice sort of frothy head, but still maintain that malty character, so we could try and keep that nice flavour in some of those lighter coloured beers. So that's the beauty about the toffee, is a very light colour. That was a really unique product. No one else around the world makes that product. I remember when I first put it out there, people said, "Oh, what the hell is this?" And I said, well, "Give it a go." And yeah, it just flew. Obviously, the Shepherd's Delight was a real winner. I remember when we decided to try and get into Australia, and all the business experts says, "Oh, don't go to Australia. Australia's, the toughest place in the world to do business, and you're trying to sell grain over there." And they said, "It'd be like trying to sell snow to Eskimos." And I said, "Oh, thanks for the encouragement, but I'm going to give it a crack." So anyway, I flew over there and I went and saw. Went to Mountain Gate Brewery, because I thought, well, they're a bit of a lead. Everyone looks up to them. Maybe if I get a foot in the door there, that could be something to hang a hat on. And I caught up with Dave Edney, and I don't know if any of you guys remember Dave. He was the head brewer there, hell of a nice guy. He was pretty gruff at the time, and he said, "Well, I'm trying to make a red beer, but nothing I ever use seems to bloody work." He said, "If you can make a malt that'll give me a red beer," he said, "I'll give you a crack." Oh, that's good. So I went home and I spent about 3 months perfecting this product in the roaster, and it was quite a tricky malt to make, and I pulled it out with Shepherd's Delight. Now, we did a whole lot of bench trials, and we worked out exactly the perfect grist that will guarantee a red beer every time. So I sent all the details and the malt over to Dave, and I said, "You stick exactly to what I've got here." So anyhow, he made his beer, and I rang him up and said, "How'd you get on?" I said, "Nah, it didn't come out bloody red." I said, "Oh, come on, Dave, that's nonsense." I said, "I bet you didn't stick to the recipe." He said, "Yeah, well, you're right, Doug." He said, I chucked a bit of roast barley in the end because I didn't think it would work." I said, "Well, you give it another crack." So he gave it another crack, and sure enough, he rings me up, and he's in an absolute over the moon. He says, "Jesus, I've never seen anything like it. It's bloody incredible." And of course, they came out and did their rare breeds with it, and it was a real hit, and it just took off. Absolutely easy malt to work with, and it's just guaranteed you're going to get that lovely red colour. Because I mean, you can get all shades of red, but to get a real good red ale, it needs to be just perfect. And so that was a real pleasing moment for myself. I know.
Yeah. It sounds like you've learnt on the way a lot about brewing, through what you're doing. But I also did wonder, has your own beer tastes, how have they changed, from when you started out? I don't know whether you're a Canterbury draft man or given your heritage, maybe you're a Heineken man. Or were you a craft beer drinker? What's your personal journey been?
That's a good question, right? And if you go back, I started out. I learned to shear at a very young age, and I was in the shearing sheds, and that's how I ended up buying my first farm, really. And of course, you'd turn up to the wool sheds, and down here back in the day, it was all the DB. Everybody was drinking the DB, and it was in the big quart bottles. And of course, they had the DB Clydesdales back in the day, and so that was what we sort of grew up drinking, I suppose. And we never really thought too much of it. We would scoff it down, and after shearing, the farmers would bring it out, at the end of the day, and so that's sort of kind of, I guess, what we grew up on. There was no real craft beer back in the day. If you went to the pubs and we'd do the rounds with your mates, it would be CD, DB, Lion and Spates, and I think the whole lot all tasted the same. Nobody really knew who was buying the rounds, because every time a round come around, you just downed it, and who really cared? And it was only $3 a jug, so they were the good days. But obviously when we got into the malt side of it, you're absolutely right. We had to understand brewing, and that's when Gabi really took over. We got our own pilot brewery in here, and when she started the marketing side of it, and she's an absolute, she's a fully qualified vet. She's the brains of the outfit, to be fair, and she really understood exactly what the customers were, and of course she would relay everything to me, and I just learnt from her. So what's my beer of choice now? Well, look, what I love about craft beer is there's a beer for all occasions, and that's the reality, because it just depends what the occasion is. Is it a really hot day, you've just been working hard, you're coming off the farm, you're looking for a thirst quencher, or is it in the middle of winter, or is it a special occasion? And that's the beauty, there's so many different beer styles, and to be fair, I don't have a favourite. I just love trying new beers all the time and enjoying the variety. That's such a cool thing about it. If I'm in a pub and I'm, Pilsner's probably always my go-to, but if, you think about it, I'm always excited to try something new. Like now there's these new barrel-aged beers that, that are all different types and everything, and it's such a wonderful thing, beer, and I'm, I think it's a shame it doesn't have as good a name out there as it should do with the younger generation, because they don't know what they're missing out on, to be fair. They fill themselves up on all these bloody vodka and lemonade and all this other crap that they come around with. And I think back to the day, beers, and it's good for you. Nutritionally, it's really good for you. And I can't understand.
Yeah, you can say that. You definitely can say it. Yeah. You're not a brewer, so you can say it. Yeah.
So, it's just, there's so many. And every time you have a beer, it'll bring you back. It triggers a memory. That flavour will trigger a memory of a good, that good feel factor of, that reminded me of that time when I was doing that and what have you. So, horses for courses, but I love beer.
Good man. Martin, did you have anything? And I know we'll probably cut this, listeners don't have to put up with it, but Martin's got another a meeting coming up at 2:00, so he may have to
I've got to dash fairly shortly, but I just wondered kind of where you see the future, I guess. What excites you about the future of malt?
Well, obviously, we don't just supply into the brewing industry, we supply into distilling and baking. But look, brewing is still a very important factor, and the reality is that we've been drinking beer since the beginning of time. It's not going to go away. It just goes in phases. And we're starting to see that. There's some of the younger generation are hanging out with Granddad who had the flagon, he's doing a bit of home brew, and all of a sudden it's become trendy. But it's not just that, it's a science. There's biology, there's chemistry, everything else, and some of these kids are getting quite into it. And it's just a phase. You wait, you go another 10 or 15 years, and then everyone will go, we want to be cool, we want to... And, look at Crate Day. Look how successful that's been. I know, down here in the South Island, they can't keep up with those quartz bottles again. That's coming back in. People, it's just a trend. It'll come and go. Don't worry about it. I'm positive. I've always been a positive person. And, I think, yes, it's not going to be like the old heyday when, the 6 o'clock swill kind of thing. But beer's got a big place in society. It's a big part of the way we communicate with each other, the way we socialise together. And I think some of the brewers they're a wee bit too timid in how they actually, advertise the benefits of beer. I mean, I know they're all worried about what Karen thinks, but the reality is Karen's not the majority. and we need to, I know some of the things that, the positives that come from, the community, getting together in the local and all those sorts of things. We've lost the art of being able to get together and have a social drink. And the thing about beer is you can have a glass of beer or 3 or 4 glasses of beer and you're not off your face like you are when you drink some of these other alcohols. So, that's for me. I think we just need to start concentrating on the positives,
Yeah, that sounds to me like a really a point to wrap up this conversation. We could actually probably go on forever, Doug. I'm sure you've got a book in you, actually.
Oh, one day,
yeah. So many
stories.
Have
you ever married a Brazilian? I think that's what I'm going to call
it. So there's probably a story in how the hell you met Gabi. So, but yeah, we're here to talk about beer, so we won't go into personal relationships. But
well, the reality is, though.
Look, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, the reality is, though, Mike, is that Gladfield is Gabi is such a key part of it, and when she came on around just at the right time, and without her in the business, and all the brewers know who she is. She's incredible. She's got an amazing ability with her. She's so vivacious, and it's that Brazilian vivaciousness and friendliness. I think that's why Gladfield's probably been so successful. Yeah, I'm the man in the back. I can make the malt exactly how she wants, but she's the face of it, and without her there, we wouldn't be successful.
Behind every successful man, exactly. Yeah. All right. Hey, look, thanks again so much, Doug. Thanks for your time and for your great storytelling and just sheer energy. It's brilliant.
No, good on you. No, thanks, Michael and Martin. I appreciate the opportunity. No, it's very good.
Well, that was some ride. I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah. Was there anything that stood out for you, Martin, listening back to it?
Yeah, I think, interestingly, there was lots of all the agriculture and malt related stuff was all really interesting. But one thing that kind of lingered with me is towards the end when we were talking about kind of the positive benefits of drinking, but not from a kind of necessarily a medical perspective, because that's a dangerous tightrope to walk. But about the social cohesion, the going to the pub, going to a bar, sharing time with friends over 2 or 3 beers is definitely a benefit to society. And the beer is a better vehicle in that scenario than RTDs or spirits or whatever. So I thought that was a really nice point to end on.
Yeah, and I think it's a valid point too. I think you and I can say these things. I think the law requires that people who produce alcohol don't rave on too much about the positive benefits of it. But yeah, it's. I was actually having this conversation with someone else recently. A guy who has pitched a story to me about the positive aspects of alcohol, and just around all that. And I do think it's interesting. It's not like the tide of, and I suppose I use these words carefully, modern temperance, which is caught up in a whole lot of things, like just general movement towards well-being at one end versus actual pressures against the whole alcohol industry from various directions. But it all adds up to drinking less. And yeah, there is something that we sacrifice if we go too far down that path. And that is that whole socialization aspect, but also a little bit something that's caught up in the name of this podcast, which is that whole idea of that you relax and talk openly and honestly. And, people say your defenses are down, and that could be construed as a negative thing, but it's actually possibly a positive thing, I don't know. So yeah, it was a good point and well made in true country fashion.
Yeah.
And I think also in rural places in particular, the pub still serves like that really valuable role that maybe not in urban centres quite so much. So yeah.
So it's the third space that people talk about, as it's not home, it's not work. It's a third space. And that is, it's important to maintain those. I still think that there's nothing like a good proper pub where you've got a cross section of society. You've got it's home to the darts team, it's home to the knitting circle, it's the home to the it's everything, and it gives that, and alcohol is part of that. It does. It I don't think can't be the same if it's just a cup of tea.
Yeah.
No. I can have a great conversation over a cup of tea, but
it isn't the same. I agree.
Part of it.
Yeah. It does serve a purpose in society. Have you ever read that book? I know we're waffling on now. Called Drunk. By I'm just going to look up his name as we speak. Edward Sling. What's his name? Oh, I've forgotten it. Might have to cut this bit. I'm trying to Google it while talking, so that's never going to work. But it was about how alcohol helped us become civilized, so to speak.
Okay, I have not, but it sounds interesting.
It is. It's a really good book. We'll drop the name in the show notes if I don't find it in 2 seconds. But the reason it came up recently was Edward Slingerland. It's a great name, Slingerland. But the book is called Drunk: How We Sipped, Danced, and Stumbled Our Way to Civilization. And the reason I was talking about it recently with a friend was about how purportedly some of these tech companies in Silicon Valley have tested microdosing coders with alcohol in order to get them into a more relaxed state so that they didn't feel constrained and were able to be more imaginative in their coding. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Remind me not to get in a self-driving car coded by anybody who's been microdosed on alcohol while writing it. So, I think in danger of rambling on in terms of that. Mention of that book reminds me as well what was something we were talking about off air as well, about writing by Pete Brown, the UK beer writer,
yes,
who again had an awesome book on the working men's clubs in the UK and how they were tied into kind of societal development and how beer was part of that, but wasn't all of it. But I can't remember the name of that. Now I'll have to look that up and put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
But it is an excellent book.
Yes, this is the problem with not really preparing and just going with the flow. But there you go. This is an emergent conversation, but it's probably time we put a nail in it and called it a day. Yeah. All right. So thank you, Martin, and thank you, listeners.
Thank you, Michael.
We'll catch you next time.
The Third Pint Theory is recorded, edited, and produced by myself, Michael Donaldson, and Martin Bridges, the beer bigwig. You can find past episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the other podcast platforms.
If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please leave us a comment or rating. It really helps other beer lovers find the show. You can also find us on socials. We're third.pint.theory on Instagram and at thirdpinttheory.bsky.social on Blue Sky.
Don't forget to check out what we're up to outside the podcast. You can read my latest articles, reviews, and news in the Pursuit of Hoppiness magazine at hoppiness.co.nz. Plus, you can sign up to my weekly beer news email, Friday Night Beers, at hoppiness.substack.com.
And if you're a brewery, bar, or restaurant owner looking for help with making the most out of craft beer, you can get in touch with me at martin.bridges@beerbigwig.com. I can help you with beer lists, events, tastings, or other ways to help you make better beer decisions.
Finally, if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or advertising, or you had any other suggestions or questions, drop me an email at michael@hoppiness.co.nz.
Until next time, keep your glass full and your hops fresh. Ka kite ano.